Okay, so this video is intended for COP 4331, Processes of Object-Oriented Software at UCF. And right now it's October 13th, 2023. The reason I'm giving you the date is because these React components go out of date fairly quickly. So if it's a year from now and you're looking at this code and something doesn't work, it's not my fault. But as of today, everything I'm going to show you works just fine. The first thing we need to do is we need to break things off into separate source code modules. I'll give you a for instance. I added the exact same method to login.js and cardui.js. It was called build path, and it did the exact same thing, was the exact same code. Obviously, that's a very bad principle. That's a very bad thing to do. It violates the dry or DRY, don't repeat yourself principle. So we're going to split that off today. In addition, server.js has all of this API code, which really needs to go in its own separate module. So that's the first thing we're going to do today. So take a look here in server.js. I've commented all this out. It's still there, but what I did was I created a file called api.js. And inside of api.js, I went ahead and required Express and MongoDB, because those are the two things that we need for the API to work. Express is actually the API middleware, and MongoDB is the database code, or the database library. The only thing, all of this is the exact same thing. From here on down, you'll notice you won't see any difference in the code. But I have this exports thing that wraps all of this and ends right here. So that's actually super important that I did that. And now, from server.js, all I have to do to make this work is add these two lines, API require api.js, which is that file I just created. And then I want to call the set app so that it is able to set up the Express app and the MongoDB client. So just remember, every time you make some sort of a change, you want to be able to test it. So here I've got it tested, and it seems to work okay. And I mean, I've used this before, so I do know it works okay. But just make sure you always get in the habit of testing everything before you actually, say, "Oh, I'm done." So, okay. Then while I'm at it, I'm going to get rid of stuff out of server.js that I don't need. Remember, we said we were going to try to clean up server.js so it's more maintainable. And actually, you might have noticed I accidentally commented this out. That's actually necessary. That's going to make sure we don't get any of those core errors. So CORS errors. Let me put that back. So that was a mistake on my part. But we had killed this, and instead we'd add this where we're dynamically listening on whatever port Heroku assigned us. Okay, so now we have that big pile of code removed from server.js and stuck into a separate source code. Now what we want to do is we want to get rid of that violation of the DRY principle. So we're going to create path.js in the components folder. And obviously that's the wrong path. Remember, we had that totally mangled up path that we were using. So here's my path.js file, and all I'm doing here is replacing those two identical methods that I had in login.js and cardui.js, and I've got the correct mangled up path there. Okay. Now going over to login.js, what I need to do, first of all, you can notice I've deleted the old build path. And in order to use it, I say say BP equals require, and then that, and then to call build path, I just have to say BP because that matches this name up here. So I do it there and log in, and that works. I'm going to go to card UI. should have done the same thing. I replaced that build path method with that, and then on each one of these, bp.buildPath, bp.buildPath. So that's it. Now, obviously, I'm going to insist that you test all of this. Okay, so here's the development server going. And remember, that stuff, I wouldn't worry about those warnings. After we do some additions, those are all going to go away. Okay, so HTTP. So here we go. We're going to connect to this. Don't forget we're running all this locally. So today, for this video, we're going to totally avoid the whole deployment issue. We'll talk about that in just a minute, though. Okay, so that's separating. That's all we're going to do right now about creating independent, separate source code modules. But now that you have the general idea, you should be able to do any more of that you need to. Okay, so let's talk about JSON Web Tokens, or JWTs. These are going to be the tokens that are going to remember if we're logged in or not. So at the very start, when you log in, the login API, if you've successfully logged in, is going to need to create a JWT and return it. And it's going to stop returning the user ID and the first name and last name, because those will all be contained within the JWT that it creates. It will return that back to the client, and then the client will hold on to it. That's what it's going to use now, so that the application knows it's still logged in. Every time it makes another API call, it's going to go ahead and send the JWT so the API knows that you're logged in. And this is how we're going to provide at least better security to this application than we did to the last application, the small project. So we're going to start off. We've got to install JSON Web Token in the root and front end. Okay. And in the front end, you want to also install JWT-decode. And I'm going to assume that you've already installed this in the cards and front end folders. If you haven't, make sure you get that done. Very important, because now we're going to be relying on the environmental, the .env file again. So, all right. So what we have to do is add an access. We have to add something to the env file, access token secret. It's going to be in the .env file. We also have to go to Heroku and add that to the environmental variables there. So step one is let's go ahead and do that now, since that's the second part of this. Okay, so in env, here we go. I have access token secret equals COP 4331 rocks. You can make it whatever you want. And remember, on Heroku, I have the same variable on Heroku. All right. Next, we have to create a file called createjwt.js. And this is going to hold all of our, we have some local JWT functions they're just helper functions. They're going to make it easier for us. So we require JSON Web Token, which we just imported. We're going to require that because we're going to be looking to the environment in order to get out that access token, the thing that's going to be used to encrypt the JWT. So here we create a token, and this is actually just a helper function. I did this to create redundant code. I'm not sure exactly what the sequence of events was, but here's an explanation of the timeout. The tokens eventually time out. Right now I'm defaulting. The default is 20 minutes, which is fine. But let's say someone continues to use your application, and they're using it, and then all of a sudden your JWT expires because the 20 minutes is gone. Well, the way to fix that is that every time they do a valid operation, you have to refresh the token, right? Right. So now you have another 20 minutes, right? So if I do something, I have another 20 minutes. If I do something else, I have another 20 minutes. Otherwise, you're going to get some people really irritated with you that after 20 minutes and they're still in the middle of using it actively, that it expires. Now, this is returning actually a JSON package, and the key is access token, and the value is this JSON value. It's going to actually give you a token. Okay, so that's create token, and this is the function that's going to determine if it's expired. It just calls this JWT verify and determines if it's expired. If it has expired, then you're no longer validly logged in. Otherwise, you are. And this refresh is going to take whatever token you give it and return a newly created token with the default 20-minute expiration. Okay, so that's all there is to this helper set of functions. So now we've done this. Edit the login API endpoint so that it creates a JWT with relevant information and returns it. So this is actually how you do it. Okay, you create the token. First, you require that file we just created, and then you call its create token function. Now, if we go over here to login, you'll notice that I have actually already done that. And I put all this in a try-catch block just to be a good citizen. And I create the token. Now, instead of returning the JSON with ID and first name and last name, I'm just returning the JSON web token because that contains all that information. And you can contain any information you want in the JWT. You can, time of day, a secret number, zip file, whatever you want, you can include it there. So the JWT is very flexible, and here we just have those 3 pieces of information, but we can have anything, and then we return it. So that's the creation of the JWT, and this is the step 1 in what we're doing. Okay, that's the very first thing we have to do. Now, obviously, realize I'm going to here's all the code that you can copy and paste, and this all should work just fine. This is actually where I got it from. Okay, so what you want to do now. Okay, here's the API endpoint. So here I have a little call out just to tell you what I did in the login. Now you have to test it. Remember, I'm never going to let you get away with or suggest you don't test. You have to test everything. But you can't test it with the front end. You're never going to know what's going on with the front end. So you're going to have to test with Postman. And I do have Postman somewhere here. So you're going to have to test with Postman. And you'll notice, come on Postman, you'll notice we're going to call the login the same because the calling convention hasn't changed at all. If we go here, login, password, and so forth. But now when we send this and we do hit that API endpoint, we're not going to get back. Notice we did not get back the user ID and a first name and a last name. We got back the token. Okay, the token is encrypted, and it's encrypted, and only you will know how to decrypt it because you've got that secret word. So that's step 1, right? Step 1, you need to make sure you get step 1 done correctly. Once you get that done, check it off, and then go on to step 2. Okay, so the next part of this is for do login. And what do login has to do, it has to realize, okay, I'm going to call the login API the way I always did it, right? But then I'm going to get back something different this time. I'm going to get back the JWT, and then I want to go ahead and put it into local storage. And even before I do that, I have to decode it. and I'm going to assign some local variables and save to local storage, and then I'm going to redirect to the next page. We already redirected to the next page. So at the top of login, you need to import decode from JWT, decode, and let me just show you where that is. Again. So I don't think I've done it in this file yet. I'm going to go do that right now. Okay, so at the top of this module, I've got import decode. And here, notice I'm calling this the same way I always did. There's no difference in how you call it. But what you're going to get back is not user ID and so forth. You're going to get back access token. And then you go ahead and decode it. And once you decode it, then you have this decoded class, or actually it's an object. And then I just assign local variables with what I got back. Now there's another thing I want to make sure I do is I'm going to go ahead and save this to local storage, because then the other modules are going to need this and I can use it. And finally I just redirect to cards. And going back to the Word document, this is how I updated the do login function. Okay, so let's test and make sure that adding the JWT didn't totally break our login process. So try to log in. It should give us the exact same results, although it's doing different things behind the scenes. So we should be able to log in. Okay, all right, there we go. So we know we didn't break it. It actually is. So both ends of the login process are now working, which is really good. Okay, so for step 3, what we'd said is that we have to amend add card and search cards API endpoints, because what they need to do is accept a JWT so that they can verify that the user is logged in. So we're just going to use this for each one of them. And at the beginning of each endpoint, we're going to add some code. We're going to change this to this, because now we're also taking this JWT as a third parameter. So we're going to test the validity of the token. We're going to see if it's expired. If it is expired, we're going to say that JWT is no longer valid. We're going to return that as an error. Otherwise, we're going to, here, I'm just throwing an exception here. So at the very end, we also have to refresh the token, right? After we've done our thing, performed our operation, remember we said we need to refresh the token so that it's got the extended expiration date. Okay, and so we do that for search card and add card, and I'm going to go ahead and switch over now and show you that. Okay, so here I am. I'm in Visual Studio, and I'm in the API.js, and here to add card, I check to see if the token, here, taking that third parameter, and here I'm checking to see if the token is expired. And by this point, I've concluded it's not expired. Finally, I've got to refresh the token. And lastly, I just return if there's an error or the refresh token. And I do the same thing for search. Search cards and add card, really, this is identical code. I'm sure there's a way to, I'm violating DRY. Okay, I got it. I haven't fixed that yet. So, and then I refresh the token. So we can't really test the entire system because the add card and the search cards front end part have not been amended. So this is expecting a JWT, and it's not going to get it, and it will crash. But we can test the backend and just make sure, the backend server, and just make sure we haven't made a syntax error. So it shows us that there's no syntax error of any kind. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it works, but it means at least we didn't have some sort of syntax error. And I've used this code quite a bit, so chances are very good that it still works. And the last thing that we have to do to complete our implementation of JWTs is to amend the add card and search card methods. Now, you are going to be adding many more endpoints, so you have to kind of duplicate this process as you go. And remember that we needed to make sure that we had imported decode from JWT-decode. We already did it for login. This is just kind of a reminder. So for the endpoints, we receive a token, and what we have to do is make sure that we add. So here, what we do in add card, we get a reference to token storage, and notice there's a dot because it's back a couple of directories. And then what we do is we say JWT token storage retrieve token, and that's going to put the token right here in that JSON object. Okay, so it's actually pretty simple. And here for search card, we really do the same thing. Here again, I'm violating dry. Finally, once the fetch comes back, the refresh token has to be stored back into the local storage because it's got the updated date and everything. So I'm going to take you over to Visual Studio, and we'll see this in action. Okay, so here in Visual Studio, here's add card, and as I showed you before, we just make a reference to that, and then we go ahead and add this to the JSON token. We make the call as we always have, and then when we get the answer back, we go ahead and store the updated token. And for search card, very similar. Here's the same code. Once we're done, we store the newly updated token, and that's really all we have to do. So that actually finishes the section of JWTs. Now, I have this next section for Axios, and Axios is actually optional. All Axios does this is what happens on Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon. You do not need to do this. Axios is sort of a super fetch. It does the same thing that fetch does, but with a lot more options. So it's totally optional. The other section here is Mongoose, and Mongoose is also totally optional. And I'm almost going to suggest that maybe you should go ahead and skip both of these sections unless you really want to, because I'd rather you take the time to polish everything that we've already talked about and get it right than to add these. If you want, get finished with the other sections and then come back here and maybe consider doing this.